Hi there, this is Metal Mike, and welcome to podcast number 2.
All right, let's jump right into a really interesting framework today, one that kind of reframes the whole conversation around addiction. This is super relevant if you're navigating recovery right now or stepping away from thinking about it just as, a matter of choice and looking at it more through, physics and economics, actually.
Okay.
Our focus today is unpacking the Unified Flux Model, the UFM. We want to understand its core idea because why addiction isn't just a problem, but something that gets progressively worse, kind of destructive. We're drawing on some really insightful research, including work from someone we call Mental Mike.
Yeah, and the UFM defines addiction in a pretty different way. It's not seen as a moral issue or just a behavioral thing. It's framed as an energetic imbalance. Basically, it's what happens when you rely on, borrowed energy. The substance, or maybe the behavior, it doesn't create energy. It just pulls energy from your future, takes it now.
Okay, hang on. So if I use something today, I feel, powerful, sharp, maybe just relieved. But that feeling is actually funded by, my energy reserves from next week or next month.
Exactly. That's the idea. It gives you this huge immediate hit that feels amazing, like a sudden surge of power. But it's a loan. And like any loan, it has to be paid back, always with interest, with compounded consequences. So you end up more depleted than when you started. That gap, that deficit, that's what the UFM calls the energetic debt.
Ah, right. And that really explains the trap, doesn't it? What starts out feeling like people talk about that honeymoon period, right? Where it seems like the benefits are totally worth it, but then it just collapses into this painful, grinding need. Pretty soon, you're not even using to feel good. You're just trying to avoid the crash, trying to keep the energetic debt collectors away.
That's the cycle.
Okay, so let's dig into the neurobiology of this debt. Mental Mike's work talks about the brain's reward system being like a really delicate energy economy. How does the brain get fooled by this massive energy loan?
Well, it gets fooled because the signal is just so overwhelming. But first, we need to be clear about dopamine. We often hear pleasure chemical. But that's not quite right, is it?
No, it's more complex.
Right. Dopamine is more about anticipation or wanting. In a healthy brain, it motivates you towards a goal, and the amount released is kind of calibrated to the effort involved, the achievement. It helps you sustain effort.
So, finally getting that promotion after working hard for months or finishing a tough project, that gives you a dopamine hit that feels earned. It matches the effort. Earned energy.
Precisely. Earned energy. But addictive substances, they just blow past all the natural controls. Things like meth or cocaine can trigger a dopamine release that's maybe 10 times higher than anything your brain produces naturally. That massive flood basically rewrites your brain's priorities. It screams, this substance is the most important thing, overriding, food, relationships, even basic survival instinct. Okay, so there's the high. But what's the immediate cost? What's the debt that gets incurred right then when the brain gets hit with 10 times the normal dopamine? Well, the brain desperately tries to maintain balance. That's homeostasis. So to protect itself from this constant artificial overstimulation, it adapts drastically. It does two things. It cuts back its own natural dopamine production, and it reduces the number of dopamine receptors or makes them less sensitive. It basically starts shutting down the internal factory.
It's like the brain goes, okay, if all this energy is coming from outside, I guess I don't need to bother making my own anymore.
You got it.
Yeah.
And then when the substance wears off, the system is just empty, depleted. The result is that profound anhedonia, that crushing inability to feel pleasure or motivation from normal life, listening to music, connecting with people, finding satisfaction in work. It all feels flat, gray, that awfulness, that deep pervasive flatness. That is the neurobiological repayment of the borrowed energy. The future you borrowed from is gone, and the factory is offline.
And Mental Mike and the UFM say this downward spiral is pretty predictable. If that anhedonia is the debt showing up, how does tolerance fit in? How does that mark the shift from borrowing for a boost to borrowing just to, function?
Tolerance, when you look at it through the UFM lens, isn't just the drug working less effectively. It's actually the visible sign of the energy debt cycle getting worse.
Yeah.
Because the natural dopamine system has been damaged, less production, fewer receptors, your baseline level of functioning just plummets. You're living in this constant deep energy hole. So you need more and more of the substance just to crawl back up to feeling somewhat normal, or what passes for normal then. Just to reach that artificial 0 point, you need to get through the day.
God, that sounds utterly exhausting. And if the brain's dealing with this massive chemical debt, I imagine it's not just about neurotransmitters, right? What about the rest of the body, the physiological cost?
That's a really critical point, especially for understanding recovery. Chronic substance use throws the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, or HPA axis, completely out of whack.
Yeah.
The system is basically the body's central command for stress. It regulates how we handle anxiety, fear, fatigue, mainly through hormones like cortisol.
And what happens when substances are constantly messing with that system?
Well, the substances might artificially crank cortisol up or tamp it way down, just confusing the body's natural stress thermostat. The system forgets how to manage stress on its own. And here's what the UFM points out. When you remove the substance, the HPA axis doesn't just snap back to normal. Oh no, it becomes completely dysregulated, either hyperactive and screaming or totally burnt out and exhausted.
So translate that for someone maybe in early recovery. If their internal stress system is shot, what does that feel like day to day, long after the drug is gone?
This is so important for people to hear because it explains so much of the struggle. It leads to that severe, prolonged physical and emotional distress. We're talking intense anxiety that just won't quit, crippling irritability, terrible sleep problems, being emotionally raw, overwhelming fatigue. And these aren't just for a few days. They can last for months, sometimes even a year or more. And crucially, this isn't a sign you're weak or don't have enough willpower. It's the biological consequence of that massive energetic debt. Your HPA axis is basically trying to relearn its job from scratch, and that process is often slow and painful.
Wow, okay. The economic analogy the Unified Flux Model uses seems really helpful here for clarifying how this debt just grows and grows. Can we walk through those 4 stages? Because seeing that progression makes the whole downward spiral seem tragically clear.
Yes, understanding these stages can really shed light on why it's so hard to break the cycle. So stage 1 is the initial loan, substance use. This is the illusion phase, right?
Yeah.
You take the substance and boom, confidence, relief, comfort, energy feels limitless, problems vanish. It's the honeymoon, but it's all borrowed from the future.
Right. And then reality, or the brain trying to find balance, starts pushing back. You need more to get the same feeling.
Exactly. That's stage 2, accumulated interest.
Yeah.
Tolerance. Your natural systems are weaker now, so you need bigger doses just to feel okay, just functional. The cost of borrowing is going up fast. Compounding. You're not really chasing the high anymore. You're just desperately trying to stave off the crash, avoid feeling that debt. The thought of stopping and actually facing that debt feels unbearable.
And if you do stop, even for a little while, the system comes calling. Loudly. That must be stage 3.
That's stage 3. Debt collection withdrawal. This is where the system forces repayment. It's the most acute suffering, physically and psychologically, intense sickness, deep depression, overwhelming cravings. All that pain is basically the direct measure of the energy you borrowed back in stages 1 and 2. It's payback time.
And that intense pain often drives people back, right, to what must be the final stage, the reason relapse happens so often.
Precisely. That leads to stage 4, bankruptcy, severe addiction, or relapse. At this point, the suffering of withdrawal, the anxiety, the anhedonia, the physical misery, it's just too much. The person feels totally depleted, like they can never recover naturally. So relapse, taking out another loan, feels like the only way out, the only way to temporarily stop the unbearable pain of this energetic bankruptcy. It's not a moral failure. From the perspective of the collapsed system, it feels like a desperate, temporary, energetic necessity.
This UFM view really shows how addiction goes way deeper than just brain chemistry. It seems to fracture someone's connection to meaning, to purpose. Can you talk about that psychological void the one substances seem to fill, at least for a while?
Yeah, substances can offer this really powerful but totally artificial shortcut to something that feels like transcendence. Dissolving the ego, numbing trauma, quieting those big existential fears. It creates this illusion of being okay, of connection, maybe even oneness. But because it's fake, chemically induced, and actually deepens the underlying energy debt, when it wears off, the emptiness left behind is even worse, more profound.
And the UFM brings in Carl Jung's idea of the shadow self here, connecting it to this borrowing cycle.
Absolutely. The shadow is all the stuff we reject about ourselves. The pain, the shame, the trauma we push down. Addiction, in this view, becomes a way of dealing with that shadow, but destructively. Instead of doing the hard work of facing and integrating those difficult parts of ourselves, we numb the pain with borrowed energy. But that just feeds the shadow, makes it stronger in the dark. And eventually it bursts out in these compulsive, self-destructive ways. The borrowing cycle actively prevents real psychological and spiritual growth.
So if we zoom out, what's the ultimate spiritual cost for someone caught in this cycle of borrowing and depletion?
Ultimately, it's a progressive dissociation, a disconnection from meaning, from purpose, from other people, eventually even from your own life. It leads to this profound sense of isolation and, frankly, existential despair. People often describe feeling like they're just watching their life happen, totally cut off. The problem isn't just the substance, it's losing that vital connection to what the UFM calls the unified flux, that natural flowing current of existence, meaning, and genuine well-being.
Okay, so this discussion has really mapped out addiction not as a simple choice, but as a kind of systemic collapse driven by unsustainable borrowing. I think the main takeaway for you listening is that relying on these external fixes, this borrowed energy, well, it's just mathematically and biologically set up to fail. And the way out isn't just about gritting your teeth harder. It's not sheer willpower. It's about energetic restoration.
Exactly. And that restoration means reclaiming that connection to life itself. Real recovery involves addressing that spiritual and energetic hole, finding sustainable sources of purpose and meaning that go beyond just feeling good right now. It's about shifting from that core state of dead, which is isolation, towards participation, whether that's through creativity, service, spirituality, connection. That's the fundamental move away from borrowing and towards actually creating sustainable energy within your life.
So here's something to maybe chew on as you go about your day. How can you consciously start shifting today, even in small ways, moving away from that feeling of energetic isolation, of being on the sidelines, and towards actively participating in something bigger than yourself? How can you start creating sustainable energy and purpose instead of taking out another loan from your future?
I'm 25 years old, and for most of my life, I thought addiction was a character flaw. Just stop, just choose differently, just care more. But I did care. Every morning I woke up hating myself. Every time I promised my mom I was done. Every relapse I swore would be the last, and I still ended up right back there. I started drinking at 14 pills, cocaine, pretty much anything that shut my brain off long enough to breathe without feeling like I was drowning. Nobody saw the anxiety. Nobody saw how loud my head was. And drugs changed that. For a few hours I felt normal. Not invincible, just quiet. That's the part nobody tells you. Addiction isn't always chasing pleasure. Sometimes it's escaping a pain so deep you can't even name it. The Unified Flux Model gave that pain a name, the void a real, felt experience of being cut off from yourself, from others, from any sense of meaning or purpose. Mine had roots trauma I didn't recognize as trauma, attachment wounds that taught me early that connection wasn't safe, a nervous system so deep in survival mode it forgot any other way to exist. That's when substances moved in. The UFM calls it borrowed energy because substances don't create peace, they loan it to you. They flood your brain's reward pathways with dopamine and endorphins, and when you're suffering that intensely, that relief doesn't just feel good, it feels like being saved. But borrowed energy comes with debt. Every time I used, my brain adapted fewer receptors, less of my own chemistry firing, so I needed more just to feel normal. And when it wore off, I paid it back with interest, more anxiety, more depression, more sickness than before. The void I was trying to fill got deeper every time. My prefrontal cortex, responsible for decisions and impulse control, was getting weaker. My amygdala was in permanent overdrive. My stress response was so chronically activated, I couldn't tell real danger from someone's tone of voice. I wasn't weak. I was neurobiologically dysregulated. Then I found the podcast. The way they explain the void, the borrowed energy, neuroplasticity, the truth that the brain could actually rebuild itself, that these pathways weren't permanently damaged. For the first time, addiction made sense, not as a moral failure, as a process, a survival strategy that had become the threat itself. And if it was learned, maybe recovery could be learned too. The UFM maps recovery through 4 pathways that work together. Physical foundation first, sleep, nutrition, movement, mindfulness that calms the brain's alarm system and rebuilds decision-making. Then the deeper work, processing trauma, healing attachment, wounds, rebuilding self-worth. Addiction had dismantled. Third, getting energy moving again. Breathwork, somatic practices, real community, not performing connection, actually experiencing it. And fourth, meaning, reconnecting with what actually matters, what I value. why any of this is worth doing. Because abstinence isn't the finish line, stopping is the starting point. The real work is restoration. I still have hard days, still get cravings, but now I understand what's happening. My amygdala fires, my body braces, and instead of hating myself, I recognize it. And I know what to do next. That understanding gave me something borrowed energy never could. Real hope, grounded in understanding my own mind, my own biology, my own story. If you're listening and feel trapped, hear this. You're carrying more pain than anyone realizes, and somewhere your brain found a survival strategy that became destructive. That doesn't make you hopeless. It makes you someone whose void needs genuine restoration. Not more shame. Understanding. And maybe understanding is what finally saved me.